And a lot of people who've had near-death experiences do become quite religious sometimes. It has a pretty profound effect on their life. And I mean, I guess the thought of death scares them so much that it's too hard to cope with. And people have said to me, if you'd had a near-death experience like I have, then, or if you'd been in a tough situation like me, then you'd understand and you'd believe in God. And well, I have actually had a near-death experience about 2.5 years ago. You see, some people like to bungee jump, and some people like to climb mountains, and some people like to ride motorcycles and as their hobby, and I like to do drugs. I've heard religion summed up as the opiate of the masses, and that being said, that doesn't mean I'm necessarily against a little recreational drug use. I mean, it can be a good thing. It can be quite enlightening, provided you don't get addicted to it. I mean, it can be, quite good for the mind to simply ponder on concepts of spirituality, I don't know, attempting to reflect your own humanity in it. The same thing, I think, goes for drugs in general. A little experimental drug use, a little recreational drug use can be a really good thing. But if you're going to do that kind of thing, then there are certain risks involved. In the same way as there are certain risks involved if you want to climb mountains, or you want to go bungee jumping or river rafting. And all you can really do if you decide to do that is be as prepared as you can be. And sometimes things still go wrong. And is it worth it? Well, if you were to ask mountain climbers whether it's worth it, they'd probably say yes. And if you were to ask me whether one bad trip was worth all the good trips, because most of the time I have a great time on drugs. Most of the time I'm generally really careful because I want to have a really good time on drugs. I want to have fun. So I am generally pretty careful, but this one time I did screw up and it landed me in hospital. And it's a bit of a long story, but it is relevant to the topic of religion. About 2.5 years ago, I managed to get my hands on some Amanita muscaria mushrooms, which are hallucinogenic. Now, unlike the psilocybin or Liberty Bell mushrooms, which grow on the West Coast, the Amanita muscaria mushrooms are also poisonous. I took some of it, and I left it for several hours with no effect at all, and it didn't affect me in the slightest bit. So I left it for 2 days, and then I took the amount I'd had before plus half again, and then I really started to trip out. And I didn't realize this at the time because I hadn't done my research properly on these drugs. But the potency of the hallucinogen can be up to 20 times more potent in one part of the mushroom than the other, because these Amanita muscaria mushrooms are much larger than the smaller psilocybin mushrooms which grow on the West Coast, so it wasn't really an issue with them. But with this one, it was. I remember looking at the stars out on the deck, and my vision was starting to go. I mean, I couldn't quite focus on the stars, and I was starting to feel dizzy and a little bit sick and a little bit disoriented, and it wasn't really what I was expecting because it wasn't like the other mushrooms. And it sort of came on pretty strong. And then about an hour after it first started to kick in, it wasn't slowing down, and I was still going up. And I stumbled downstairs because I was feeling sick now at this point, and I was starting to sweat. And then there was one point where my lucidity was starting to go a bit. I was starting to lose my grip, as it were, and that's when I came downstairs and I said, call an ambulance, I have to go to hospital. Because whatever I had taken, even though it was only half again of what I'd taken 2 nights earlier, it was obviously too much, and since I was starting to lose control, of my mind, I needed help. I think I kept my eyes closed because I didn't really want to open them because it was just too much. And it didn't really make sense anyway to have my eyes open. And, like I was, when I said call an ambulance, I was starting to get scared because, I'd never done this particular kind of mushroom before, so I really didn't know. And there were moments I felt myself start to cycle down in my own mind. It was like parts of my mind were flipping on and off, like an electrical grid failure, is what it felt like. And it was quite a sensation. I mean, it would have been extraordinary if it wasn't so scary. I remember moments where people were asking me questions, and sometimes I could answer them, but most of the time I was out of it completely. My ability to judge time was skewed up. I felt like I was slipping out of reality into some kind of other reality, but it was completely identical, but yet not the same reality. And it was very, very intense. And I remember lying on the stretcher, and the people were talking over me, and because I was so scared that I thought I might die. It occurred to me when they weren't really talking to me anymore. It occurred to me that, oh shit, I must be dead then. I really thought I was. I mean, I can't quite explain to you why I was still able to think that I was dead. Well, if I was dead, right? But of course, when you're on mushrooms, things don't necessarily make a whole lot of sense. I figured, I guess this must be how everybody dies. They start to lose control in bits and pieces in their vision and their thought and their mind, and people start, they just fade away. And it was really scary. I thought, I wonder if I go into some other, because of course I felt like I was going through different dimensions at the time, different kinds of realities that had their own kinds of physical laws. And I thought, well, if I slip into some kind of God reality, well, and if he's this horrible God, then I'm so screwed. I would be absolutely screwed. And even though I was really scared because I thought I was dying at the time, I remember being put into the ambulance and I remember laughing. Or at least I remember feeling like it was funny. The thought that there would ever be this kind of universe where this God would be pissed off at me for whatever life I might have led struck me as so funny that I just couldn't help but laugh, even though I was really scared that I might just fade away and die. And it was a sort of normality, and I just wasn't all that scared after that anymore because that was just so funny. And then I woke up in hospital about 3 hours later. I remember little bits and pieces of not really getting to hospital, but I remember people moving me around. And I had I think they took, blood out of this arm, and I had an IV drip in the other arm, and the little heart with these little things they stick on your shoulders. And I woke up, and my vision, of course, was completely blurry. But I just felt so much better after 3 hours sleep, and I was starting to come down. And I mean, I can't even really say that was a bad trip. But it certainly was pretty interesting when you're faced with the idea that I really thought I was going to die. At times when I was tripping out, I really thought I was going to die. And the idea that I would ever meet some kind of godlike thing that would send me to some eternity in fire and torment was actually, even in my addled state, was incredibly funny to me at the time. So, what can I tell you? I've had my near-death experience where I thought I was going to die, and it was still funny. Or the idea of God was still funny to me.